Hey there, everyone, and welcome to our third and final class in our Plot Your 2022 and Plan Your Year Ahead training program. We're going to dive into monthly perfections today, which is super fun, but sometimes the detail of it can be a little bit overwhelming. So hopefully we'll be able to guide you through that. It's quite a simple concept, and we'll see how we go with it. We'll talk a little bit about how the technique works. We're going to use the example chart of the singer Jewel today. I don't know if any of you know Jewel. It might be individuals of a certain age might know her. Anyway, we'll talk about her chart. We just need an example, really, because most of all, you're going to do this on your own chart. So with that said, let us get our PowerPoint going. Okay. So the intention with taking you through the monthly perfections. Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm so excited to dive in. If you're joining us on the live call and you've got questions that you need answers, especially if they're relating to the techniques that we're teaching, please use the Q&A box so we can make sure they're easy to find. That'll help Larry and Michael keep an eye on them. And of course, if you've got any stories about your own experiences that you want to share, you're welcome to do that in the chat box or afterwards in the discussion forum. The discussion forum after class last week is full of rich conversation. There's some great technical questions that have been answered there. And there's also some beautiful sharing of life experiences with different perfections. So it's a great resource to take some time to read through as you're settling into and embodying and integrating this technique. So the intention with taking you through the monthly perfections is to help you create a personalized type of monthly calendar that you can use to guide you in the year ahead. And what we're going to use is your annual perfections as our kicking off or starting point. And then we're going to show you how to basically go round the chart month by month. And one of the ways, there is a little bit of debate about, how effective the monthly perfections are. I don't use them with every client, but I do use them with my most regular clients. And since I started using them with clients a few years ago, they love having this kind of topical approach to each month through the year. It reminds me a little bit, for those of you who may or may not remember, this book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin that came out many years ago. And the author wanted to try to increase her feelings of happiness. And so she picked one theme each month of the year to focus on. And this kind of monthly perfections is a little bit of a take on that, where using your birth chart, you can get a sense of the quality of energy that is going to be influencing you from one month to the next, but also the types of topics that might be really good to focus on in that time frame. And if I remember, I'll share a little bit about one of my own monthly perfections that's coming up early in the new year when we get into this material. Okay, so here is a quote from one of our ancient authors on this material. So Paulus Alexandrinus, one of our ancient astrologers, in a translation from Dorian Gacella Greenbaum, says, "As many years as the nativity should spin out, we pass these through from the hour marking Zodian, giving the first year of engendered time to the horoscopos and the second to the post-ascension of the horoscopos." So there are some terms here that you might not be familiar with. And this first passage is about the annual perfections. And the hour marking Zodion or Zodion is your ascendant sign. And so the first year of time in your life from 0 to 1 is the first house. And then the second year to the post-ascension, which is basically the sign on your second house there. So we go around, that's our technique for annual perfections. The second paragraph refers to the monthly perfections, which we're going to have a look at today. And this quote says, "Again, one should treat the month likewise, beginning from the Zodiac where the year leaves off and giving the number of months being sought to the Zodiac in order. And where it should fall out, we reckon the month is there. And so there's some old phrasing, some old style here. But what we're basically saying is the zodiac sign where the year begins, so your annual profected house and sign, we're going to start counting our monthly profections from that part of your chart. And so if you want to know what is going to happen 6 months into your current birthday year, we're going to count 6 houses around from where we started the annual profection year. So the quote is not intended to confuse you, but hopefully to introduce you to the longevity of this technique. And we do see this technique referred to through the ancient period as well as into the medieval and Renaissance period. So it is something that has been in the toolkit for astrologers off and on throughout history. Okay, so as we go, now we're going around the chart. So I'm going to give you the simple technique here, and then we're going to look at an example, and then I'll give you a little bit more detail. So your profected house becomes the starting place. So whatever your annual profected house is, that is going to be your main theme for the year. And it is also going to be month 1 in your monthly profections. And then each month we're going to move one house around, so that we change into the next house each month when your date of birth comes up. So the date that we're each changing houses for our monthly profection will be whatever our date of birth is. So my date of birth for the month is the 27th. Yours might be the 1st. Somebody else might be the 15th. And so we're going to have that as a personalized piece. The example chart we're looking at for Jewel, she is born on May 23. So every month on the 23rd, she will be starting a new house by monthly profection. So that's the key thing here. There's 2 technical points I want to make sure you've got. One, that you understand we're going to change monthly profected houses on the date of the calendar month that is the same date as your birthday. And the other piece is that we start our monthly profections in the same house that your annual profections are in. Yes, so Farine is saying she starts a new house profection today by monthly profection because her birthday is the 20th of the month. So if anybody else's birthday is the 20th, which is just the calendar date we're recording today, that is what we're going to do. And this is a great question. I actually was just saying, as I was saying this out loud, what if your birth date is the 31st or even the 29th and 30th? Yeah, because February only has 28 days, doesn't it? Now I'm having a calendar moment. Yeah, so if your birthday is the 29th or 30th or the 31st, I suspect you'd have to use the last day in February for all of those to reset. And most of you will be having your date there. But yeah, if it's the 31st, you might have to switch over on the 30th instead in some months. You don't have to get too obsessed about that. I mean, if you change, it'll just be 1 or 2 days different if your calendar date, if you're later in the month. So hopefully that is giving you enough to get started. So let's take a look at this example here. So Jewel is born on May 23. So the first perfected month for her in any house year will run from May 23 to June 22nd. And that will be where we have the monthly perfection and the annual perfected house are exactly the same. In month 2, that'll start on June 23rd and run to July 22nd. And that'll be the next house around from whatever the annual perfected house is. So your monthly perfections will always change on the same calendar date every year, but the house that you go into on those calendar dates each year will be different depending on the starting point, because we know the starting point for the annual perfections is different each year. So let us take a look at the entire birth chart for Jewel. And so what we want to do is work with her current annual and monthly perfections and put the story together here. So the age is what we need. So Jewel was born in 1974, and that means she turned 47 this year in 2021. And anyone off the top of their head remember what house 47 is by annual profection? Wondering, just to make sure you're all awake out there. Excellent. Okay, so 47 is a 12th house year. So we know that she is in a 12th house year by annual profection. It's a year where she has the sign of Virgo. So Mercury is activated as the Time Lord for the year. So there's natal Mercury in Gemini in the 9th house. Okay, so if we know we're in a 12th house year, then our first month from May 23 to June 22nd is also going to be a 12th house month. And then on June 23, we're going to go into a first house month. So we're still in the overarching 12th house year, but we have a first house month theme coming up for just 4 weeks. And then we keep going round. By the time we get to July 23, we're coming into the next house, and then August 23 down in the 3rd house, and then September 23 into the 4th house, and around we go. Okay, so that is the process. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways you can list this data out. Some of you will like a long form kind of word-based list, and some of you will like to do this around the birth chart so that is helpful for you. Everyone has a different style here, so I want you to find the right style for you. So that's the process, not super technical, but all you have to do is follow the houses round month by month. I want to go through it just to make sure it's super clear. And then we're going to talk about some interpretive tips to make sure that you know what you're working with. The theory, one of the main pieces of theory with monthly profections is to note when by monthly profection, you come around to the house that holds the Time Lord in the natal chart. So for Jewel, who is in a 12th house year ruled by Virgo and the planet Mercury, when she comes around to that 9th house monthly profection, those 4 weeks in the calendar year where she'll be in profecting through the house that holds natal Mercury, they are said to be the most significant weeks of the year that give you a real sense of the core events, the core experiences, and perhaps even some of the main decisions or activities of the year, using the Time Lord, of course, as the guide or the reference. So hopefully that gives you a sense of this. So we would start the first month for the year is here in the 12th house. And so what we're looking for is when will she profect into the 9th house? It may not necessarily be the 9th month in the year, but it is when she is profecting through the 9th house in the chart. So that's the key. What are the calendar dates for that? Okie dokie. So let's take a little look at this data in a slightly different format. Hang on one second. So here we go. This is the list format. I've just realized there is one typo here because, of course, we don't have any 14 houses. That's meant to be 4th, not 14th. So that'll be easily fixed, and we'll get that updated before we share the slides after class. But we're in a 12th house year. So our first month of the year is in the 12th house. So I want to make sure that we're not getting confused here. Month 1 in the year is 12th house in the chart, May 23 to June 22nd. Then we go into the next month, starting June 23, and that'll bring us into the first house in the chart. July 23rd brings us into the next month, which will be second house. August 23 brings us into the 3rd house. September 23 into the 4th house, not the 14th. October 23 into the 5th house month. November 23 is the 6th house month, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. December 23 brings us into the 7th house in the birth chart. January 23 is the 8th house for her. February 23 to March 22nd is when she'll be perfecting through the 9th house in the chart. And then in the 10th house starting March 23 and the 11th house, April 23. So the last house that you perfect into should be the house just before the annual house. And then on your birthday, everything resets and we take our lead from the annual perfection first. Now, I've highlighted a couple of houses here. One, I've highlighted the month where she's perfecting through the 9th house, where we have the natal time lord. And that's the house to watch, if you're still trying to get your head around how this technique works or how to get information from it, or even if you're still really trying to deeply understand some of the topics in your natal chart, paying attention to the monthly perfection that brings you into the house of your natal annual time lord is going to help reveal how that planet works and how the topics of its houses come to the fore for you. The reason that I've highlighted the 6th house month is that's the current time frame. And I don't know about you, but I've been seeing a little bit more in some of the press and media and even a little bit on social media about Jewel lately. She's been doing a lot more podcasts and interviews and things. And I couldn't really understand why. I'm like, maybe she has a new album out. But it turns out she has been a contestant on a show called The Masked Singer. I don't know if any of you know of it. It's a US-based show where I guess singers perform anonymously, like in costume, where you don't know who they are, and they're competing with other singers. I'd never heard of it either. But it's a show on some TV channel in the US. And the idea, of course, is to see who will win. So I guess it's a reality style show that's based about well-known singers showing up to perform, but anonymously. And the big finale happened just last week, and Jewel was actually revealed as the winner. She's been appearing in costume, the costume of the Queen of Hearts, and singing and performing anonymously, and was declared the winner last week. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, a 6th house month, we wouldn't necessarily expect to see a great success in a 6th house month, except that she has in her birth chart, we'll go back and take a quick squiz at that. She has a very wonderful planet in the 6th house. We have Jupiter in Pisces there. This is the benefic of sect because she's a day chart, but we also have a very, very dignified planet there. And so not that I expect all of you to be winning, high profile competitions when you perfect into months where you have a dignified planet like this. We will expect some kind of elevation, success, a little bit of breakthrough, some sort of positive achievement or development unique to that month. Now, for those of you commenting in the chat, yes, Farine saying she's in a 12th house year overall, and the competition was anonymous. So that's a lovely little point there, that there was a quality of being hidden. We can also say that, winning a competition in this particular 6th house month, it's something that she has been performing in for a few months prior. And so it's sort of build up to that, but certainly a good indication for some positive developments or successful outcomes in that time frame. What I think is also helpful in the chart of Jewel is that the Time Lord in the natal chart is in quite good condition. It's Mercury in Gemini, high up there in the 9th house, fairly well separated from the sun for Mercury, not combust or under the sunbeams, which is good for Mercury. Mercury is conjunct the South Node. And what I wanted to share here, this is sort of a natal piece, but we'll see it come up in timing, is how the South Node, one of the positive things that the South Node can indicate is this idea. When we say releasing, we can also talk about prolific. And when people have planets on the South Node, releasing might be publishing or making art, whether it's music or performances or pottery or images, making it available for consumption. So that South Node can take from you and disperse out into the world. And so we may see more music coming from her this year in general to do with that. The other feature, if we want to get really into some of the technicalities here, is that there is a strong sign-based connection from this profection of Jupiter and Pisces to the natal Time Lord. They're forming what would be a whole sign square angle. And so the qualities of Jupiter strongly affect all the planets in Gemini anyway, but especially so in this sort of special annual profection year where Mercury is highlighted, and then in that month where Jupiter is asked to step forward. Okay, so hopefully that is giving you a little bit to work with. So let's keep going. I can see there's some great questions coming through, and there's a few things we will have a look at as we go further forward. Okay, so we've got her chart. Let me move this. So hopefully you're all able to, okay, this is what I wanted. Hopefully you're all able to work through some of your own chart material as we go. This is the format that I like. I like a little bit more of a visual style. And this is what I will often do on a client's chart is I'll print it out and then I'll write the calendar date that we're going to switch into each of the months as we go around the year. And that is what I then use to as my guide for sharing that information. And I'm actually going to recommend that as part of the worksheet, and it's actually written in the monthly profection worksheet for you, that you actually refer back to this slide and you print off a clean version of your own chart and you do this for your current monthly profections. It's really helpful to get you to hone in on which parts of your chart and which planets are going to be active from one month to the next. What you can do, there's two ways you can work with your monthly profected house, in the same way that there's two layers of info to bring in for your annual profected house, is that you can have a look at the planets or the points that might be contained inside that house. And you can also consider the condition of the ruler of your monthly profected house, knowing that it's just going to have a short-term influence for about 4 weeks. So if you have a really good planet in your chart, you get 4 weeks every year where it's going to give you a little bit of a taste by monthly profection. If you have a planet that's in difficult condition or that you know is associated with some stresses or a particular problem, there'll be 4 weeks each year where that is really highlighted for you. There might be 8 weeks because, of course, in the case of a planet like Mercury, we'll have 2 of the months in the year ruled by Mercury. Same with Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Okay. So all you would do if you're going to write this data around the outside, it's basically changing the month, but keeping the date based on birthday. So we know her birthday was May 23. So on June 23, we're into the first house, July 23 into the second house, August 23 into the third house, September 23 into the fourth house, and so on around the chart. It's also helpful to write it out like this just to make sure you haven't missed any months or done them in a weird order, which sometimes happens if you are moving quickly. And then we get a sense of the year. We know that the period from now, we don't know this level of detail necessarily about a public figure. So just to use this as a teaching example, the month where Jewel was in her first house profection, we were dealing with matters to do with the topics of identity, of course, where the ascendant is, but we're also dealing with some bigger themes that might highlight situations in our lives where there are perhaps some forces that are out of our control or some uncomfortable pressures because we have both Pluto and Uranus in that particular house for her. We can note that it's the sign of Libra is first house, and that planet Venus over there in Aries in the 7th in detriment would have been influencing that time frame from June 23 to July 22nd. Then we would come in to the next month around into July, where we have the sign of Scorpio on the second house cusp. We've got the part of fortune there. The one way that I work with the part of fortune when we perfect into the house that holds it is to consider it's a month where we might feel a little bit more at the mercy of luck or chance, you know, either being in the right place at the right time or in the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on the condition of the part of fortune and particularly particularly the ruling planet of the part of fortune in our chart. So the part of fortune has it's known as the primary part of the moon, which describes things that fluctuate and some things that are a little bit, we're at the mercy of fate or fortune, if you like. The next month around, we'd come into the third house where we see the sign of Sagittarius. That would highlight the planet Jupiter as being helpful for those 4 weeks, but also the influences of the planet Neptune and the North Node there as well. So they would be influences to navigate in that 4-week period from August 23 to September 22nd. So I won't do every single house as we go around, but hopefully that is giving you a sense of the approach, if you like, the technique to work with. And that's the key. So let's go a little further now that we've got an understanding of that. And this is the summary. We've talked a little bit about how we're in a 12th house year by annual perfection. So we might not expect a lot, but it really does depend on the condition of the Time Lord. And we've got, as we said, Mercury there quite well placed in its own sign, in quite a decent house. And in the birthday chart, so the solar return chart is the one to look at to check, is your Time Lord operating, better than in the natal chart, the same, or a little bit worse. And in the birthday chart, Mercury was also at 22 Gemini. So that's a lovely iteration that we're really going to see the best of what this Mercury in Gemini has to offer in this whole year as a theme. And then we have, we can sort of then figure out what will be the months that might be more happy or stabilizing or fulfilling. And they will be the months that we might perfect into where we have a planet in dignity, or we might be working with the influence of a benefic. So that's where the 6th house month becomes really helpful. We can also have a look at the months where we might be dealing with a little bit more of a stressful time or more of a difficult 4 weeks. And that might be the months where we're perfecting through a house where we have Mars or Saturn, or we're dealing with a planet that might be in some sort of debilitated condition. And so we'll go through those in a few minutes. And yes, if you're perfecting through a house in your chart that has a stellium or a lot of planets or angles and other points there, yes, you're definitely going to see more of a busier, more active 4-week period. Okie dokie. So that's the theory there about monthly perfections. Now, what I want to just to share in contrast, I know that not all modern or current astrologers who are working with perfections really like the monthly perfections. I do, and I use them, which is why I'm happy to teach about them and share about them and help you understand them. But there really are 2 different kinds of shorter term influences that you can get from your perfections. We're looking today at the monthly perfections themselves, and they're very unique to your chart. And I think they are really helpful, especially to reveal more about the layers and connections inside the chart. But you can also be looking at the transits of the planets, especially if your Time Lord is the Sun, Mercury, or Venus, or even Mars, where they're going to be changing signs every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, or every 6 weeks. You will get some information coming in from them as well. But the key is that in any given year, you've got your monthly perfections, and then you really just have to watch the transits of one of those quicker moving planets, whichever one, of course, is your Time Lord. So let's have a look a little bit more about some of the theory that you're going to work with. So as you're going through month by month, you are going to pay attention and make a note of when the monthly perfection comes to the natal house that holds your Time Lord. And for those of you that have already had that in your current perfected year, it'll be great for you to reflect on what that month was like, what events were happening, what decisions you were making, just what you were dealing with and experiencing in general. And for those of you who've still got that month to come up, you'll know to pay special attention then. The monthly perfections help you go a lot deeper with the different topics and planets, and even the links, the subtle interactions between different parts of your birth chart. And so, as much as we're sort of telling you this is what you can expect month by month based on the topics of the houses, as well as the condition of the planet, you can also approach this from a curiosity perspective in terms of what does my chart have to tell me about this, so that I don't want you to be limited by the theory that you think should be showing up, but to hold that as part of your understanding of that time frame, and to also be observing what comes up that you might not have thought was connected to that house or that planet in your chart. And that is a really rich way to work with this. I've just seen a comment here about an intercepted house. And so I do want to just give a quick reminder that in this technique, we do need to switch our charts into the whole sign format. So for annual perfections and for monthly perfections, the ancient Greek astrologers, at least, there is the intention here that each house is one whole sign. And so you won't end up with any interceptions in this technique. And so even if you use your quadrant-based house system for all your other techniques, that's okay. But for the perfections, you will want to switch the chart into the whole sign format and use the house topics, particularly the month by month. They do need to come from your whole sign chart. So that can be helpful. Okay. So let's go a little further, because I can see some really nuanced questions coming in about interpretation. And I want to get to that shortly. So the monthly perfections are going to influence how much you can focus on the annual theme or not in any given 4-week period. I really like this as a client-centered approach, because we're able to say to the client, you know, this is a great month to focus on your finances because you're perfecting through your second house. Or, you know, this could be a month to be careful with your finances if there are some tricks or challenges regarding the second house. And you can get tips on topics, as well as how our energy levels and our motivation levels go up and down through the year. I'm sure you're all familiar with how we go through some periods of time where we feel motivated and focused and we can get into a rhythm and stick with it easily. And then there are other times where we feel like things are a little bit more pressured or stressful, or we're not able to be as consistent. And we can see this sometimes even just the quality of the sign changing from month to month, in addition to the planets that then show up. It is a really simple, accessible, and practical way to do timing with your birth chart, but also to learn more about how your birth chart operates. So keep that observational, curious quality inside you as you go forward. And some of you will be able to apply this to the past year that we've had, and certainly as we go forward into 2022 as well. Okay, so let's minimize that. So here's a few tips for interpreting. So what you're getting here is a calendar for the year ahead that is centered on or inspired by your personal birth chart, which means it's going to be unique for you. And we're going to give you as many tips as we can on the planetary symbolism influences, but it will be a little bit about you getting to know how your chart works. But here's some things to think about. What is perfecting into your Aries house like, for instance? What about perfecting into the house that holds your natal Mars? How are those two things different for you? And this will have a lot to do with the condition of Mars. And when we pay attention to the sign qualities of the house that we've perfected into, this also allows us to really get a sense of how that sign's themes and tone show up in our chart. Are you more motivated or impatient when your Aries house is up by monthly perfection? Are you enthusiastic and more lively and assertive when you perfect into the house that holds your natal Mars? Or do we know that your natal Mars is in a difficult sign or a difficult aspect, and therefore some of the struggles that you might have with being assertive or getting started or taking the initiative might be really highlighted in the months where you perfect into the house that holds your natal Mars, or when you perfect into the months that are ruled by Aries and Scorpio, where that Mars energy shows up. And this is also a great way to kind of observe or inquire as to whether Venus and Jupiter in your personal chart are as good as they're talked about. What is it like when you perfect into the house that holds Venus or Jupiter for you? Or what about when you perfect into a house where you have a planet that's in rulership or exalted? So it might be Mars, but if it's Mars in Scorpio, how do you get to see the benefits or the gifts of that Mars in Scorpio? So Mars and Saturn can be helpful when they're in really good condition by sign. And Venus and Jupiter are sometimes not as helpful as we might like when they're in a difficult condition by sign or maybe in a tough aspect. So we want to play around with how effective is Venus or Jupiter in your birth chart. Now, if you've taken the chart interpretation series of courses, and particularly things like the benefits and blessings courses, which goes into Venus and Jupiter in a lot more detail, you'll have a sense of this already. And this is how you can see it in action. And if you haven't taken some of those courses, you can do the observational approach to witness what shows up. I'd also like to invite you to consider the qualities of the houses. We've just seen an example for Jewel where we've seen this 12th house year by annual perfection, but we're seeing some positive developments and some success. And that has to do with the condition of the ruler of the 12th house primarily, but then also that supporting help from the monthly perfections. So the question you can sit with is, are my 8th and 12th houses as difficult as the theory indicates they might be? Are there nuances about these parts of my chart that I can really connect with by living through them, by experiencing them? So this is important to think about. You might focus on career when you're in your 10th house, or when you're perfecting through the house that has the midheaven in it. You might be intentionally focusing on friendship when you're perfecting through your 11th house, for instance. So these are the ways that we can kind of bring in the topics of the houses we're perfecting through for our themes for that month. There is something else that I don't recall reading about in the older texts, but I have observed as somewhat influential. So this info on this next slide, I don't want you to take it as gospel. It's a working theory that I have at the moment, but I offer it to you so that you can experiment with it to see how it goes for you. So when we come into a perfected house, and this would apply either by annual perfection or monthly perfection, when planets are nearer to the cusp of that house, if you like, or the start of the sign, so a lower degree in the sign, you might notice that the energy of those planets shows up earlier in that perfected year or in that perfected month. If the planets are in the middle of the zodiac sign or around the middle of the house, you might experience their energy through the middle of the year or the middle of the month. And of course, year here is your birthday year, your perfected year. And if you've got planets or angles there that are in the end of the house, so towards the end of the zodiac sign, you might experience their influence a little later in the month, a little later in the year. And because this is a piece of theory that is, I'm sort of testing in practice at the moment, I'd love to hear your experiences with this, whether you do notice this as well, or whether you see something different. So let us know via the discussion forum after class how that is for you. Colleen's saying that she has noticed this too with people's chart. It's not as simple as if Venus is at 9 degrees, you'll feel it on the 9th. No, that's not what I'm saying here. More just if you have a look, because your birthday year, so let's use the month. Your birthday month, right, might run from the 23rd, like Jules, to the 22nd of the following month. So earlier in that month would be in the first week or perhaps 10 days. So shortly after you start. Earlier in a year might be in the first month or two of the year. So that's what I'm thinking here. So that would be something to experiment with as you go around. Now, what many of you, I'm sure, are imagining at this point is that potentially you're dealing with two different Time Lords with annual perfections. We've got your annual perfected Time Lord, which is the planet we learned about in our previous class, that is having the biggest say over your year. But then you'll also have a monthly Time Lord, a planet that comes in for just a few weeks to influence what's going on for that 4-week period. So how do we kind of put those two together? There is a little bit of an influence that will show up where the monthly Time Lord will add like a little bit of spice into the mix. But the annual perfected Time Lord is going to be the dominant or the leading or the overarching theme here. So that the monthly Time Lord will enhance what the annual Time Lord is doing, or might temporarily distract or delay what the annual Time Lord is doing. But it's not like the monthly Time Lord takes over, if you like. So that's something we want to think about. We want to think about the monthly Time Lord. You know, if the annual Time Lord is like, we're making a chocolate cake, and the monthly Time Lord is we're going to put vanilla buttercream, or we're going to do a cream cheese buttercream. You know, it's definitely going to change the experience, but the center of it being a chocolate cake is still a chocolate cake. So that's my little baking example there. Which is where I typically go to. So you're still trying to do the main theme. And then the monthly Time Lord is you're baking the cake and you get distracted because the delivery person comes to the door, and maybe your monthly Time Lord takes you off track for a few weeks, and then you come back and you try and pick things up. Or maybe your monthly Time Lord is really helpful and you get, you know, half a day off work or what have you, or you get some time off to focus on the main theme. So you want to keep circling back to the topics and threads of the annual Time Lord, but seeing if you can incorporate on these 4 weekly chunks of time, whatever the monthly Time Lord is doing. And this is where I might share a very brief personal Time Lord experience here. And so in my current profections, I will be in a Cancer profection house starting very late December. So I go into my moon ruled monthly profection late December to late January. And I was like, okay, what's that going to be about? And I'm not actually going to tell you necessarily about the topics in my own chart for that profection, but I want to tell you something about the moon that not all students have, because it's a very traditional ancient astrology idea about the moon. So the moon is a planet that historically had to do with movement. It was about travel. And it's one of the reasons why the third house, where the moon has its joy, is a planet to do with movement and travel in the chart. More kind of frequent or regular type travel, because that is the nature of the moon. So between December 27th and January 27th, which is the monthly profection for me, we are going to be away for a night, then taking a long plane trip, then staying in one place temporarily, and then going into another place where we'll be staying long term. So we're going to have these 4 sort of movement, travel, change energies. And I was like, oh, that's such a classic moon ruled month. I've done nothing of the sort for quite some time. And we're going to have quite a lot happening in this 4-week period. By the time I get out of that moon ruled Cancer monthly profection, I'll be in a place where I'm going to be anchored for a few months. So that's just a little personal story. And so I want you to think about the quality of the planet from its general essence, as well, of course, as its condition in your own chart. Cynthia's loving her own 12th house moon year. So tell us about the condition of the moon in your birth chart, Cynthia, because that will definitely be influencing your experiences there. Yes, sorry to make you all hungry for chocolate cake. That is one of the downfalls of not having class in person. We don't actually get props. I just have to take you through it. Okay. So this is a great question from Shelby, a clarifying question. I'm going to read it out and then we'll answer it. When there are a lot of transits happening throughout the year with the annual Time Lord, should that take more focus than the monthly profections? Look to where the energies converge or diverge the most, or something else? Yeah, I think the annual profections are the main theme. And so transits involving your annual Time Lord are going to set the tone and tenor for the whole year. So that's what you want to focus on first. And that's what you would want to focus on most. So If you are newer to this technique of annual profections and you're just starting to work with them, that might be all you do in your first year or two of working with annual profections. Once you get more familiar with the technique and you want to add in that next layer, that's where you're going to bring in this monthly profection approach. And it is like a qualifying or adding in a little bit of nuance, but it's not going to take over the whole overarching yearly themes. So hopefully that helps clarify that question, and let us know if you need more. Okay. Now I can see there are some questions here. So Susie's clarifying, isn't the moon also kind of related to the domestic and nurturing as it rules Cancer? It absolutely is. And that's why I wanted to share this example, because I don't think we think to add in movement as a moon ruled thing, but we want to add that in addition to our topics of nurturing or family or home. I'm actually in a 4th house month by profection at the moment. I'll be 5th house when I do Cancer, and we're doing a lot more homey things this month where we're in the 4th house. So that will hope. So yeah, so the Cancer and the moon won't always be about home for everybody. So that's where you can look at your 4th house and your IC. So that's great. Happy to clarify. And then, yes, if the moon or the sun are your time lords, either by annual profection or monthly profection, what you'll want to do, if it's the sun, you can use the sun changing signs month by month as transits with your time lord. But if it's the moon, you want to pay attention to the degrees of the new and full moons and see what they're activating in your personal birth chart. Monique's saying that she's in a 2nd house Cancer month right now, and she doesn't want to buy many Christmas presents. She's making more of them. That makes a lot of sense for Cancer, which does have a frugal side to it, and would definitely want to offer some of that homemade kind of more, I don't know, nurturing or soulful. There's a tenderness to that, isn't there? Okay, so the annual Time Lord gives us the main theme for the year. We don't want to take away from that. The monthly Time Lord is like a subtle addition that we can bring in to guide us through the year. So let's have a little summary of our profections and working with Time Lords. So the concept is quite simple. We're going to have a house that is highlighted by our age, and then we're going to get monthly themes coming through as we move around the chart, all anchored to that annual perfected house. The Time Lord that is tied to the house that you've perfected into for the year gives you the topics and the tone for the year, and the condition and the qualities of the Time Lord in the birth chart are going to give you the main theme for the year. But you can also assess the condition and qualities of the Time Lord in the solar return or the birthday chart. And that's sort of an extra piece to this, which is covered in a separate training. So if you're interested in that, we'll share more details about that. You'll get a lot of info from looking at transits that are activating your chart from the Time Lord, or transits that the Time Lord is receiving in your birth chart. So you think about, this planet in my natal chart is my Time Lord. In Jules' case, that's Mercury. So what transits are hitting that natal Mercury at 22 Gemini? And then what is transiting Mercury doing as it moves through the sky as a trigger? Then we add in our monthly profections, which gives us your personal calendar with a new theme or topic for every 4 weeks to focus on. And this is the core theory, and there are ancient texts that you can refer back to get more of the detail and the philosophy. But one of the best ways to really embody and integrate and deeply understand this technique is to work with it. And so for some of you, this is going to be your 2nd and 3rd year working with it. And we can tell the students that are doing that because your questions are going a little deeper into the theory and more nuance, which is excellent. And for those of you who are hearing about this technique for the first time, or maybe just maybe it's the 2nd or 3rd time, but maybe it's the first time where you feel like you're going to be able to work with it, you're going to learn so much by diving into it. The learning is in the doing with so many of our timing techniques. So What you're going to get here with your profections, we're going to get our annual profections giving repeating 12-year cycles, because every 12 years, the topics and the house repeat, but every 12th year is not exactly the same, because what's going on with our Time Lord by transit is going to be different. Your level of personal growth, your maturity, your innate wisdom is going to have changed as well. So that while the topics and the house might be repeating and showing up again, you're going to meet those topics and that Time Lord with a new understanding of perhaps what its limits are, but certainly what its potential is and how you're going to navigate it. So the profections give you a chance to revisit certain topics or areas of your life, to update them, to improve them, to rework them. And that is our intention in terms of sharing this material with you today, to guide you into that process. Now, there is one little piece of 2022 theory that we didn't share in our first class, and I think we're going to have enough time to include that today. So this sort of brings us to the end of the theory that we want to share on the monthly profections. So I just want to take a moment and make sure that we've grabbed any questions. Patricia's asking, does Soulify do monthly and or annual profections? My short answer is I don't know. You could double check and see. I don't think so, but if anybody has any information to the contrary, please let us know. I don't know personally, so I do apologize. This is a technique that I've always done manually. Marsha's saying that it does them wrong. So perhaps this will be a technique to use to do manually rather than rely on the software. There is some comments from different students popping up that Astro Gold has sheets for annual and monthly profections. So Astro Gold is the app-based version of Soulify that is available on all devices, but is the primary one if you're using an Apple or a Mac device. So it sounds like Soulify isn't the go-to for this, but Astro Gold will have some info there. Excellent. So some other commentary here. Okay, great. So if you've got any questions about the technique, if you're having trouble figuring out when to switch months, let us know and we can definitely help you out with that. But with that covered, I think we are going to, actually, I can see a couple of questions I'll just quickly answer. And then we're going to switch to talking briefly about some of the eclipses that are happening in 2022, which is the piece we didn't cover, which we said we would. So I want to make sure we include it. Costanza's asking, what should I prioritize if Mars is exalted in Capricorn and also Cazimi to the sun in the 12th house and the sun is your Time Lord? So if the sun is the Time Lord, you would focus on the condition of the sun itself. If you're in a 12th house profection month or year, then having that Mars exalted and Cazimi the sun there would be very, very helpful. Remember that the Cazimi is helpful to the planet that is Cazimi, but isn't so much a help or a hindrance to the sun itself. So you sometimes have to think about the point of view that you're coming at this from. Okay, there's another question here. So questions about using the solar return chart with your profected year, there's a whole separate training. It's not possible to answer that in sort of 5 minutes. If we have any spare time at the end of today, we'll cover it, but there is a whole separate training on that piece. I know it's a very common question, and actually that was the first teaching that I did on profections was that. And so that link is available on the website if you need it. And Sharon wants to confirm something on Jules' chart. So we'll just do that before we move forward. Okay, so let's get her natal chart back. So releasing info to the world with the South Node. Sometimes it's publishing, sometimes it's sharing without a fee, sometimes it has a prolific quality. And that has to do with the Time Lord being Mercury, and that is a planet that is conjunct the South Node in the chart. Well, and so Sharon's clarifying, I have it in my head that the South Node is releasing what you no longer need. So this was a nice positive twist for me to ponder. For people who are artists or creative individuals, sometimes they go so deeply into their work that when it is published or released out into the world, there is a sense of letting it go. And that allows them to free up emotional energy and space to go on to the next thing or to other things. And so the artists may no longer need that work, but it may still serve or offer or help or inspire out in the world. So that might give a bit of a reframe there. Okie dokie. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about 2022's eclipses. I'm just bringing us back. So at this point, before I do that, we've done our annual perfections and our monthly, and you are now doing some year ahead forecasting where you're combining some themes and topics and houses that are highlighted that are emerging from the birth chart itself. And you'll know to keep an eye on transits affecting those Time Lords or the Time Lord for the year as you go forward. So that is really powerful to be able to have that to guide yourself and to use it to share with others. So to switch focus and to add in, I knew we would have a little bit of extra time in this particular class. So I'm really happy that we can add this piece in here. Cynthia's asking, will the moon as the Time Lord be more reflected during the eclipses this coming year? The moon is always, so if the moon's your Time Lord, eclipses will have a bigger impact on your personal chart. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here as we get into the eclipses. There are 4 eclipses in 2022, and they're all falling in Taurus and Scorpio. So that axis where you have Taurus and Scorpio in your personal birth chart, they are going to be highlighted by the eclipses this coming year. Now, we talked a little bit about the nodes transiting through Taurus and Scorpio in our first class. So we've got a sense of the nodes by transit and how to work with them as timing indicators. So we're going to just go into this slightly more specific look at the eclipses themselves. Now, I think it's always helpful to understand the general tone and tenor of eclipses that are coming up, but I did want to sort of put a bit of a qualifier here as we're getting started, that eclipses aren't always important and dramatic for every individual. So this is really important in the same way that I see a lot of, students or even newer people to astrology getting very worried about things like Mercury retrograde or Venus retrograde. It doesn't have a dramatic impact on everybody. What we have to first do is check we have to sort of understand who or what is your birth chart most attuned to from a timing perspective. And then we can determine whether the eclipses are something you should pay special attention to or not. So there's a few qualifiers here. I'm going to share the information with everyone because it's great to have. But if your sun or moon is your Time Lord, then eclipses are some of those transit things that you should be paying special attention to. So for anyone who's in a Leo profected year or a Cancer profected year, then the eclipses are going to be more impactful for you personally. And they'll be impactful in 2 ways, based on the general energy of the eclipse, but more importantly, based on the house in your personal chart that they're activating. So if your Time Lord is not the sun or moon, there's a good chance the eclipses in 2022 won't have a big impact on you. So I know that sometimes sounds a little shocking, but not everything that's going on timing wise is affecting all of us with the same level of intensity or the same level of significance. And this is one way that you can develop yourself into a really great timing and predictive astrologer, is to be able to learn to sort through all the white noise that goes on in timing and predictive astrology and focus on the stuff that really matters for this chart in this time frame. And that is sort of more important than knowing everything that's going on, because we need to know what's important. We don't need to know everything. The other qualifying piece that might indicate the eclipses are particularly significant for you is whether the degree of the eclipse will be conjunct a natal planet or angle in your personal birth chart. So I'm going to put the charts of the 4 eclipses happening in 2022 up next. And if the degrees of those eclipses are conjunct your sun, your moon, your ascendant, your midheaven, any of the other traditional or visible planets, then that eclipse would be important for you personally. If neither of those factors are ticked the box for you personally, then the only information that you'll get out of the eclipses for 2022 is how they are just punctuating the longer transit of the nodes through the Taurus and Scorpio houses. And then they kind of fall a little bit into the background as things that are going on, but may not be the most significant or directly impactful things in your chart for the year ahead. So I wanted to just make sure we really spell that out before anybody gets too concerned about the eclipses here. Okay, so let's have a look. So we're going to have 2 eclipse seasons in 2022. Our first eclipse season will be late April through the middle of May. And then our second eclipse season is late October and early November. Of course, we know we have to have the sun in either Taurus or Scorpio for us to be having these eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. So the first eclipse for 2022 is going to be a new moon or solar eclipse that is happening April 30th, possibly May 1st, depending on where you are. And that eclipse will be at 10 degrees of Taurus. I've used my local location here, so we won't worry too much about the house placements, but I want to say a couple of little things about the general energy of the chart or the eclipse that we're dealing with. So I actually kind of like this eclipse on April 30th, which might be, again, a controversial statement. I'll tell you a little piece about why. First of all, it's a new moon eclipse that is near the North Node, and we have Uranus in the mix. So this new moon eclipse feels like breakthroughs or breaking away. The new moon or the solar eclipse quality is about fresh starts, new beginnings, pushing forward. And Uranus loves to shake things up, to do things differently, and to find ways to free ourselves from situations that have been restrictive. Now, it might be rocky. There might be a surprising or a shocking quality to it. That's definitely possible, but it is still this sense of freeing and movement forward. The other piece that I think is contributing to that is that Venus, which is the ruler, the Lord or the Lady of the eclipse. Venus is in great condition in Pisces, very near to her exaltation degree and conjunct Jupiter. So there is a little bit, there's still going to be some of those dramatic qualities of unsettled, agitated energy, which we learned about in class 1 is what the nodes bring. And that quality is amplified or intensified anytime we have an eclipse. But this particular new moon eclipse does feel a lot like powering forward, pushing through. And yes, the quick clarifying question here about eclipses is I personally only work with conjunctions. So if you have a planet or an angle in your chart around 10 degrees of Taurus, I would be considering this eclipse would be significant for you, or if the sun or moon are the time lords for you. That is the key thing there. For those of you who work with the Saros series, they are great to bring in as well. Bernadette Brady's book, Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, has some great info on that. And I do cover that in some of my more explicit eclipse teachings. So you could certainly dive in on that front. So this solar eclipse, new moon eclipse in Taurus, every eclipse does have that dramatic quality. We've got Uranus here. It's going to be unpredictable, but it feels somewhat productive or somewhat freeing in a way that you're being released from something that was creating a difficulty for you. And the ruler of the eclipse being Venus there in Pisces indicates something a little bit more helpful or positive through that eclipse. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that one. The lunar eclipse coming middle of May, May 16. It'll be May 16 in most parts of the world. If you're on the west coast of the US or Canada, it'll be May 15, but May 16 in all other major time zones. We're going to have a very tight lunar eclipse in Scorpio. The moon is only 3 degrees away from the node here in Scorpio. And this, I think, of the first 2 eclipses of the year, I think this solar eclipse, I keep wanting to say solar instead of Scorpio. The lunar eclipse in Scorpio, the Scorpio eclipse, is the more difficult one. And the reason for that is the moon is in the sign of its fall, and it's conjunct the south node. So this has a real purging quality to it, this eclipse. It feels like there is gunk, there is congestion, emotional or energetic constipation that needs to be released or needs to be passed through. So this is going to have, I think this lunar eclipse in May is when we're going to see a lot of the emotional messy outpouring, whether it's grieving, whether it's healing, whether it's qualities of uncertainty or being unsettled. So it looks a little bit more difficult. The ruler of the eclipse is Mars. Mars traditionally rules Scorpio. Mars is in Pisces, which is a fair sign for Mars to be in, but Mars is also very tightly conjunct Neptune, which is not great for Mars. And that's going to add this messy kind of lacking clarity or this quality of confusion. It also reinforces the emotional, sensitive nature of this lunar eclipse. Now, on the one hand, I could see people doing really intensive meditations or healing processes around this lunar eclipse in May. And I would definitely recommend that if that's something that you are comfortable with. There's a little bit of caution around health and physical matters because the moon is in quite difficult condition there. And if you have anything around 25 degrees of Scorpio, that's the hot degree. The moon's degree is always the active degree in any eclipse situation. That's going to be an important eclipse for you. So if that's important for you, you want to take care of your health and do things that might safeguard your emotions or help you deal with any difficult or uncomfortable emotions that you've had for a long time. Remembering that Scorpio as a fixed water sign usually helps us well, it usually reveals things that have been uncomfortable for a while. It's not like a new discomfort, if you like. And the purgative quality, the images that come to my mind when I think about this May eclipse are things like the swamp or the compost heap, where things are breaking down, they're being transformed. We're going to get some very nourishing material coming out of this eclipse. And what I mean by that is when we have difficult emotions, for instance, let's say anger or rage, when we go beneath them, we often discover that there are other emotions like fear or vulnerability or abandonment. And as we work with that, we're able to transform our sense of ourselves or our sense of our experiences into something that is more useful. But we don't get there. It's a process. We kind of have to go through it. In the same way, for any of you who compost in the garden or have done food composting and things like that, all the scraps and the leaf and the material, the leaf matter from the garden goes into, a container or a corner of the garden. And then you have to turn it. You have to turn it regularly so that it helps with the breaking down process. And this lunar eclipse in May is about that breaking down process. What has served its purpose? What have we outgrown? What has maybe turned a little bit toxic? Or, you think what food goes into the compost heap? It's usually food that has turned and it's no longer suitable for consumption. And so we want to recognize what has turned is no longer suitable in its current format or system or structure. And what do we need to kind of put through that purgative transformational process? And that's what this lunar eclipse here is about. And so that's something to keep in mind for when we get to that point in time. Just see people sharing different qualities there. So the key with the eclipses is we look at the degree of the eclipse itself. So in April, we've got 10 Taurus, and in May we've got 25 Scorpio. And with any lunation, to understand a little bit about the lunation itself, we look to the ruling planet. So the ruling planet of the Taurus eclipse is Venus, and Venus is in quite good condition, which is helpful or restorative or somewhat stabilizing, given that the nature of the eclipse is to not be stable. But I think Venus kind of shows that the unsettled energy of the April 30th eclipse is part of a process to get towards more stable things. And then the eclipse in the middle of May in Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which is in Pisces with Neptune. And that reiterates a lot of the emotional tone that is coming through with those eclipses there. So lots of feelings. We know that we're going to be doing a lot of emotional work in 2022 collectively and perhaps personally because of Jupiter going through Pisces and because of the South Node being in Scorpio in general. And so that larger process of digesting difficult emotions or uncomfortable experiences, especially from the past, is really going to be highlighted by this eclipse in the middle of May. So there's a few themes there. Let's come to our second pair of eclipses, which will be happening towards the end of 2022. And we've got a solar eclipse, a new moon eclipse happening October 25th. And that's probably going to be close to being October 25th in all major time zones. Might be the 20th. Yeah, no, it is. I think so. I think it'll be that day in Australia. And that is a solar eclipse. So new moon conjunction. It's at 2 Scorpio and it is near the South Node. So it's a little bit of one of those eclipses where it's new moon, but South Node. It's sort of like to get started, we have to end something. Venus is also involved here just because of her proximity to the sun and moon. In fact, it's a triple conjunction between the sun, moon, and Venus on this eclipse day. But the eclipse is in Scorpio, so the ruler of the eclipse is going to be Mars in Gemini. And what I think the Mars rulership of that eclipse brings in is the possibility of things being scattered. So there's a frantic quality of energy that I think this eclipse in October brings up that shows we might have this feeling of being busy or having a lot going on, but we're not actually making progress. That's one of the cautions for that eclipse coming up there, is to make sure that the activities you're involved in are actually helping you move forward. So that's an important piece to keep in mind there. So this eclipse, the solar eclipse in October, it definitely has a feeling of intensity. We're doing deeply internal work. We've got Venus there with the sun as the sun is eclipsed. And so this is very inward or inner in its orientation. Because the South Node is involved, it's almost like we have to go inside, we have to sense, we have to work in the intangible or liminal space, and then we have to let go. I wonder if some of the insights that arise from this eclipse give you a way to release something that has really been holding you or draining and depleting you. And so that's going to be a piece to keep in mind with that eclipse there in October. Then we come to the next eclipse. There's just a clarifying question here. If Venus is our Time Lord, would this eclipse also be potent? So eclipses are important to watch when your Time Lord is the sun or moon. The condition of Venus is something you definitely want to keep in mind if Venus is your Time Lord. So if Venus is going to be Cazimi, that'll be important for you to watch if she's your Time Lord. When Venus as your Time Lord is going through a sign of detriment or fall or exaltation or rulership, you definitely want to pay attention to that. You'd also want to pay attention to Venus being conjunct the South Node. That's important when Venus is your Time Lord. So I think that what Venus is doing at this eclipse is it's important to watch Venus when she's your Time Lord. And so her condition in relation to the eclipse would be important. There's sort of a subtle distinction here. Hopefully that is clarifying that. But if you need more, let me know. For eclipse conjunctions to natal points, I would tend to use perhaps a 3-degree orb, possibly up to 4 or 5 degrees. I tend to default to a tighter orb, but you can certainly use something a little larger if that is more your personal style. No problems there at all. Okay, and then we have our last eclipse for 2022 is going to be a lunar eclipse that is happening in November 8th. And in fact, I want to highlight the moon as we always do for the eclipse. So this is a full moon lunar eclipse in the sign of Taurus. Now this eclipse, there's a few things to say about this. It really highlights the Taurus and Scorpio together. the Scorpio and Taurus axis, because the eclipse is in Taurus, but the rule of Venus is in the sign of Scorpio. Excuse me. And so this eclipse is like a feedback loop or a seesaw cycle where we're constantly going between Scorpio and Taurus. So the houses in your birth chart where you have Scorpio and where you have Taurus, there is some back and forth. There's some exchange of priority. So you may be rebalancing. Do I need to do more in the Scorpio part of my life and less in the Taurus part of my life, or vice versa? So that's something to keep in mind there. Now, the degree of the eclipse in November is 16 Taurus. So that's the degree there. And the degree of the eclipse in October is 2 Scorpio. So you can make a note of that if it's hard for you to read on the screen. See you later, Colleen. Thanks for being here. If you do have to head off early, no worries at all. You can catch up on the video afterwards. So the lunar eclipse in Taurus, this eclipse again has themes of freedom, autonomy, independence, liberation, but also upheaval. And that is because this lunar eclipse has the moon tightly conjunct the planet Uranus and tightly square to Saturn. So the Saturn-Uranus square does get very close again in October. And this eclipse highlights that Saturn-Uranus square. So I think we have to get through that eclipse before we have this sense of the Saturn-Uranus square pulling apart or settling down. So yes, Uranus is big again for these eclipses. And with Saturn in the mix, it feels like there's some Saturn in Aquarius squaring this eclipse. There's something here about social rules or restrictions or even resistance coming up. So we're dealing with that sense of the collective being bound and then resisting or revolting, that the revolution against that, if you like. And so what the moon is really highlighting is Uranus and the need for social change or societal change or collective change. And we're going to see a lot of pushback here. This is going to be quite a dramatic type of lunar eclipse where I do think we will see some upheavals, and in the ways in which societies and cultures and politically, we are overdue for innovation, and we're overdue for laws or regulations reflecting more of the reality of situations. We're going to see some of this coming through, particularly in this lunar eclipse in Taurus. One thing I did want to say about those 2 Taurus eclipses in 2022. So there's the solar or new moon eclipse back on the 30th of April. And then we have this lunar eclipse on the 8th of November. One thing that when I was doing my research on Uranus in Taurus cycles, it has a lot to do with women's rights and rights pertaining to women in society, freedoms pertaining to women and things like that. And I think we're going to see those types of topics, feminism, matters pertaining to young girls, anything that brings in that Venus thread, we're going to see a lot. It's part of the longer trend of Uranus in Taurus. It's part of the Saturn-Uranus square, and it's also going to be strongly highlighted on these 2 Taurus eclipses in 2022. Okay, so that's the overview of the eclipses happening next year. So a little bit of drama, and some of the eclipses, I think, with their stirring, agitating quality, there's more of a positive spin to that, particularly that first eclipse at the end of April. But of course, we're going to see some really intense emotional energy coming out of the eclipses, particularly those that are in the sign of Scorpio for next year. Okay, so let me see. We've got to do some summary material. Clearly, the moon is not still in Gemini because I'm tripping over my words, but I just want to clarify. Other topics that the Taurus eclipses will highlight: climate change and environmental matters, matters pertaining to women, and just the whole concept of feminism and even the feminine style. I was talking with a client about this, about a masculine style of working or living has more of a steady get up, produce day in and day out, regardless of, how you feel. Whereas a more feminine style of working or living would be cyclical, where we acknowledge that there are times where we're more productive and less productive. And so with these activations on eclipses in the sign of Taurus, I think we're going to see, how can we shift to a more feminine or cyclical based way of living and working, which might allow for ebbs and flows to do with hormones, sleep cycle, just the acknowledgement that it's not great for the physical body or the emotional state to be expected to produce in this kind of steady, almost industrialized kind of way. There were a few of you commenting from the US that November 8th is election day next year. So that'll be something interesting to note. And then the other piece of something about the Venus involvements with the Uranus in Taurus, the rights of workers or the rights of, the many type of worker individuals in society, I think will be highlighted as well. So a question from Laura, what about eclipses hitting natal outer planets? Do we look at that as felt personally? I personally don't. You could just keep in mind that an outer planet is speaking to your connection to the collective or to your generation. So it may talk about something that you share in based on people of a similar age. But I would really focus on eclipses that are hitting the visible planets in your birth chart or the angles. They will tend to have more of an impactful or influential look. And Farine is saying, is this the kind of stuff that Kelly talks about in the monthly astrology guide? I should sign up for 2022. Yes, I do share all kinds of timing info. There are weekly videos covering every aspect that go out in the monthly astrology guide. Monique is saying, yes, she highly recommends the Kelly's monthly guide. It's very detailed. Thank you, Monique. That's very kind. There is a lot of info that goes out. When people sign up, they're usually quite grateful as to how much detail, basically every aspect gets covered. So whether, Mercury is squaring Neptune or Mars is changing signs or Venus is going retrograde, it all gets addressed. So you get some info about what to expect for that. And it's funny that's come up now because it was going to be something I suggested for any of you who want to get more regular or you want some updates throughout 2022 on the timing material. So since we're talking about that, we're going to come back to that in a moment. But that's the slide to mention that. If you pop onto the website and look for monthly astrology guide, you will find all you need to sign up. We also do members live Q&As every quarter. So either the solstice or the equinox months, we have a live meetup with Q&A there as well. Okay. Loz is asking, I'm fairly newer to astrology. If I'm going through a 5th house perfection year, that is Capricorn, Saturn is what I should focus on. Correct. Yes, 100% correct. Okie dokie. Okay. All right. Yes, lots of comments, lots of discussion. Thank you all so much for sharing about the monthly astrology guide. It is on the website. And it wasn't intended to be a learning experience, but people have found it's a really great complement to their studies in astrology. Okay, so let's do our little summary for our course today. So when you're putting your year ahead forecast for yourself together based on our training here today, or if you're using this for other individuals, other people's charts, clients, what have you, what you're essentially doing is combining the themes that might come up through various different timing techniques. And in this particular 3-part training, we've covered perfections and transits. And the intention behind this is to help you personalize some of the transit information, because there's lots of timing about transits. But if you bring in your perfections, you'll have a sense of some of the transits that are more important for you. And what I mean by that is if you know Venus is your time lord and you learned in class 1 that Neptune is going to be aspecting Venus by transit in your chart in 2022, then we know that that's going to be an especially significant transit, not just because it's an outer planet to a personal planet, but also because it's an outer planet transit to your time lord. So this way, you can sort of highlight what your VIP type transits or timing events are going to be in the year ahead. I've summarized all the different things we've talked about in our 3 classes together. And so this next slide is a little bit like a checklist that you can use as you're reflecting on or wanting to pull together a sense of your main transits, cycles, and themes for the year ahead. You will start by looking at your perfected house and your Time Lord. And we talked about how some of you will be in that perfected house that'll cover you for a lot of 2022 already, while some of you will change perfected houses early in 2022 because your birthday is early in the year. And you're going to look at the themes of the Time Lord in your natal chart. You're going to look at transits to the natal Time Lord and transits from the Time Lord to your natal chart. You're going to be able to now add in the monthly perfections for those subtle themes that guide you. In our first class, we talked about some of the transits to pay attention to, including Jupiter conjunct any planets you have in Pisces and any planets in the early part of Aries. Jupiter will cover from 0 to 8 degrees of Aries, in addition to the whole sign of Pisces in 2022. We talked about Saturn transiting through the sign of Aquarius and activating all placements in fixed signs between 11 and 25 degrees. We talked about Uranus continuing through Taurus, where it is activating all fixed sign planets and placements between 10 and 18 degrees. We had a look at Neptune continuing through Pisces, getting towards the end of his journey through Pisces, and particularly activating planets or angles in your chart between 20 and 25 degrees. And we talked about Pluto coming towards the end of his time in Capricorn. And in 2022, Pluto activating 26, 27, and 28 degrees of any of the cardinal sign placements. So that is a bit of a checklist that you can use. You can almost like run a chart through that or run your own chart through that. You won't necessarily have transits from all of those planets happening. That's okay. One is usually plenty, and it'll allow you to go deeper into that. You might add in the eclipse degrees if they are significant in your own chart. So you can refer back to the slides. You will always get the slides as a download after class as well, which will allow you to enhance the size of the chart to get more of that detail if you need. And so that is going to bring you to your completion, if you like. There will be a worksheet that has already been posted actually after class today to guide you through working with your monthly perfections, just to give you a practice and a process to work through with that. I can see a question here from Costanza. Do I consider progressions in your predictive year ahead work? I do personally, and we have a whole separate training on that called Predicting with Progressions. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing that link now. And if you're not sure, you can pop onto the website and look under the courses on timing and you will find that. Okay, so Ivana saying that thanks a lot. She didn't use monthly perfections and she will try on herself for the next few months to see how it works. She wishes everyone a fantastic 2022. Thank you so much. With your monthly perfection worksheet, I'm just going to scooch backwards through the presentation. There are some questions to answer, which you can just go through and fill out. But there is also a suggestion that you refer back to this slide and fill in the actual dates as you go around your own chart, starting in your annual perfected year and then go monthly around. So I just want to make sure you have that because that visual cue will be helpful for many of you. And thank you all for your lovely comments on the monthly astrology guide membership. Love to welcome all of you in there if that's something that you would also like. One thing Ashlyn's saying that she really likes about the membership is that it's really great for many reasons, but also that I give great descriptions on the aspect combination, which helps with the terminology as well as the astro weather awareness. So you will get some tips on how to talk about different aspects, which is really helpful when you're learning. Okay, great. So that brings us to the end of class today, team. We're actually finishing on time, which is a small miracle, but a great clue that we are being blessed by that gorgeous moon in Cancer today, which tends to stabilize any planet in dignity, can bring a little bit of consistency in. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy playing around with monthly perfections and adding it in. But most of all, we want to wish you a really wonderful 2022. We hope to see you in class again soon. And if not, in the monthly membership for sure. Thank you all so much. Oh my gosh, some wonderful, very kind comments. Thank you. I'm so glad you've enjoyed it all. Blessed solstice to everybody for tomorrow. I hope you all get to celebrate something in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much, Larry and Michael, for all your help. We will still have the discussion forum going. So pop over there and let us know about your experiences with monthly perfections. And we look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Bye for now.